I mean, whatever you can kind of talk about. I mean, I guess you can talk about, maybe some of your previous experience with Health Informatics or health records, or just how you've seen kind of how health records have become more and more important as far as like what you do, within the clinic, or what you do within, what you do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a big field, which is good, for going into it. I think it's a little bit hard to know where to start in some ways, but
right.
I think.
Well, would the ACA kind of be a good place to start?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking. I mean, it sounds like you already know that story, but I mean, when I was going to medical school and in residency, we were still mostly on paper, even. University of Chicago and UCSF, which are good institutions, but there was like basically very little impetus to, because of the way that the billing and everything worked, you didn't get paid more if you were using an electronic record, and it was going to cost millions of dollars, and have to hire this whole IT team and run these servers and pay the software people a lot
and there's
of money.
No incentive
and
to
and then the additional revenue is zero. And,
right.
So there was just the world is not moving away from paper, way beyond, I grew up, using a, personal computer when I was like 10 or whatever, I mean, it wasn't very sophisticated, but they've been around forever.
Yeah. And here you are, several years later, and nothing has really changed.
Decades. So, I mean, 30 plus years old and still using paper. I mean, the kind of ironic thing, and something I'm slightly thankful for, is I actually think paper was like a great way there were so many great things about paper for taking care of patients.
Interesting.
It was like...
Can you talk a little bit about that? What do you think was sort of good about paper records?
Somewhat, I still think, the reason why I think I'm glad to have this experience is because I can like draw inspiration from some of the great things about paper as we're trying to build electronic things.
Interesting.
Some of the
so is that because you're seeing limits as to what the electronic can do?
Absolutely. Okay. Or at least how they built it so far.
Okay.
But the sort of, when I started at Cook County, I mean, literally, like the level of dysfunction, which is a good thing about electronic records, is we just had these manila envelopes for each patient, and there were just pieces of paper just randomly stuffed in there that were not even in order.
Right.
So you would just like get a
stack of paper inside.
This manila envelope with a stack of loose papers that would just fall out of the envelope, and you'd be like, okay, well, it's like, well, yeah, I did have that, CAT scan a year ago, and you're like, oh yeah, you did, and then you're like digging through, and like 5 minutes later, you're like, I just can't find it. Sorry.
Right.
Do you remember what it showed? I don't know. It's like, it was total chaos. But then, like, the next phase for me was my sister-in-law, was out of a job for a while, and I had seen other people that had very organized paper records. So I bought, several hundred just organized, paper organizers, that had sections for radiology and medications and stuff like that, and progress notes. And then this was Cook County. I was like, we need to have, some of these organized records. They're like, yeah, we don't have anyone who can do that. So
if you have thousands of patients, how are you going to do this?
And so I just literally paid her myself, and she came into the clinic, and she only organized my records because I was the one paying her. And here's my list of patients. Go into the file room and convert these things. And after she did that for 6 weeks or whatever, everyone else then suddenly saw the contrast and was like, suddenly the manila folders were unacceptable.
Right.
And then eventually, they found some way to get the other records that way. But anyway, that's sort of an unimportant part of the story. But the thing that eventually, I was able to kind of evolve the paper records to was I'd have all the information was organized, but instead of having to click through 10 different screens, you could just flip to there and it would be
right. It's right there.
And I could create the order of what I thought was important, put the important stuff on top, as opposed to just it randomly being by date or whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, if there was something I didn't even care about, it just not even included in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So it was very high density of valuable information because it was kind of personally curated.
Yeah.
And then,
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
and then I would have I would open up the chart, and on the right-hand side, I would have essentially a blank piece of paper to record today's note. And the other side, I would have one side of one page, like hand-curated summary of everything about the patient that I wanted to know. And I could, like, there would be maybe, for a really sick patient, there might be 10 different headings, and then under it I would write in, small, this is back when I didn't need reading glasses, I could like write in small, chronic headaches, CT scan, July of this year was normal, tried these 5 medicines, whatever. Like, the amount of information I needed to know about these chronic headaches was very little.
Yeah.
But
Nope.
but the information that I needed was very important.
Yeah.
And if I could look at literally one side of one page and know everything I needed to know about that patient, that was like amazing.
Yeah.
And the truth is now, like in electronic records, it's just heaps of information. It's like the same amount of information, but the density of the information is like 100 times lower. And it's like continually frustrating to me that, now I've been using electronic records for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, or I don't know, I guess 15 at the most, but like still the density of the information is so much less than what it was sort of once I had gotten the paper records to that point. And it's like maddening.
Yeah. Interesting.
So one of the things I enjoy about working with electronic health records and other kind of health information tools is like, I'm just trying to get back to there.
Yeah, interesting. Or at least to get back to the richness of information that you were able to get from the paper records. Well,
just the ease of access to the information, Like I could just glance down. I could be talking to the patient. I could glance down and just rapidly remind myself of the stuff I needed, and then I could focus on the patient instead of now like everyone's staring at their screen typing madly the whole visit. And then when they want to know what that CAT scan was, like it's in there for sure, but it's just, you just have to click and click and click. It takes like
right.
And then the patient's like, "What are you doing with the computer?" Like, I'm over here,
Yeah,
like, isn't this visit about me? No, you're like spent the last 3 minutes clicking on boxes and looking frustrated. Like,
so do you find
going
that?
On?
Yeah, do you find that it's almost it can be a barrier in some ways to making that either accessing the information you're looking for or having a better relationship with your patient in some way? Do you find that it's
absolutely? I mean, both of those things.
Really?
But I mean, I did like grow up. When I was, I don't know how old, if I was 10 or whatever, I was like coding. I was like writing code. Like, so I'm like the true believer in computers. I love computers.
Yeah.
So at one time, I don't think anyone denies the potential for what you could create that would be clearly way better than what we had on paper. And yet, like this many years into it, the potential is so unfulfilled that, like, kind of from a design or creativity perspective, it's like kind of ironically an exciting problem because it just feels like, oh my gosh, this is like a wide open space that it's not a solved problem.
So like they're acknowledging that there's a need obviously for electronic health records, obviously, and people using it. But there's still limitations with what you're experiencing with them.
Yeah, I mean the obvious limitation of those, perfectly developed paper records was no one could access them except for me.
Right.
Like probably if anyone even requested the records, like no one would do.
They would even send them out.
No one would like respond to the request. So it was like.
Plus, you had to photocopy or fax them in some way, and what if they're in different size papers, or maybe
I mean, clearly it was like that was not the right solution. But I think but at the same time, it's probably like I don't know why I'm thinking of this analogy, and it's probably not a good one, but like if you were an expert, a sculptor or something in clay, and then you were like, okay, now we have 3D printers, and like all your sculpting is going to be in 3D printing, and you're kind of like, this is probably amazing. Like once we figure this out, I can like once I make a beautiful sculpture, I can like make 1,000 of them like a week, and share these things all over the planet. It'll be amazing.
Yeah.
But then you're like, oh my gosh, it's so cumbersome. Like
right. There's all these other
I
things.
can't just like make a beautiful curve of clay.
Interesting. And she's like, I have to do it this other way to get this thing, and
like anyway, so every little piece of information I can't like say, well, this is really important information. I want this to be a big font, or like have it in the front. I want to have this is really minor. I want this to be a sub thing underneath, but this piece of information is connected to this, so bring them together. Like you can't do that. It's just all like randomly.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I have no idea what these things look like in a health record, so I wouldn't know. But I mean, is everything pretty much the same size on a screen, and you have just a bunch of buttons that you have to click on in order to access the different pieces of information?
Yeah.
Is that basically?
Yeah, and one of the pieces of information will be like all the documents, and I mean there could be 1,000 documents in someone's chart, and a lot of them are just like some kind of random insurance paperwork that somebody signed and they had to scan into the record, and like, let's face it, no one ever needs to look at that piece of paper ever again after
Right.
There's some legal or business reason it needs to be in there, but like it's clogging up right next to some like scan of their body that like showed some bad or important thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like the density of the information, like we still have the scan in there, but now we've got the for every important scan, there's 20 pieces of random insurance business paperwork that's,
so they're not really
diluting it.
Okay, so they're not really prioritized in any way, or any kind of visual or I guess, how would I say this? Like a user interface way. Like
Right.
it's not like.
I mean, there are, but they're just very rudimentary. Like, it's, I can tell you, she talks for a while about like all the improvements we've made and how it's gotten better at things, but it's still like has not. I still haven't, sort of gotten to the point where I felt like I had more or less a perfect paper record. Like I can still see the gap there.
Interesting.
Which is, like I said, it's a frustrating thing, but it's also like, how fun would it be to, work in a field where like everything's already been solved, and you're just like mechanically just pushing the,
Right.
pushing things along. Like to me, this is a super important field that's still shockingly, not very far along in its evolution.
Interesting. Do you find that you're, that at the time that you went through medical school and began practicing as a physician, do you find that your view of records is different from, say, people who are much newer to the field? Or do you find that you all have sort of common frustrations with medical records now?
There is a lot of kind of diversity, I mean, I think that someone's coming right out of residency probably never worked on paper records because they really only entered their medical training like 7 years ago or something. So on some level, they don't have this sort of contrast in their mind. I think the worst off people are who are like, 60 years old. They really developed all their kind of technical skills on paper.
Right.
They didn't necessarily grow up writing code or whatever like I did.
Yeah.
And then they're thrown into this computer world, which is like, I think universally considered a step back in terms of efficiency for the clinicians.
Interesting.
And yet, they don't have like the sort of innate desire to work with computers that maybe I do.
Right.
So I really feel like those people really have suffered greatly in the last, decade.
Yeah. And there's still quite a few people, obviously, that would probably fit in that group of people.
Yeah. And I mean, there's, like I do primary care. It's not a particularly sexy field within medicine. So, like, there's a lot of, like, we don't have enough. So we kind of need the 60-year-olds still to be able to keep working.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just dropping out.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Of your particular field, particular area?
Primary care. But I mean, in clinical medicine in general, and actually, like, frustration with electronic records is truly, like, possibly number one.
Really?
Yeah, on that list.
Wow.
Of sort of dissatisfiers.
Wow.
Which is really shocking.
Yeah, I'm totally blown away. I can't believe it. Wow, that's interesting.
And yet, I mean, I still think the potential is so great. I mean, the idea that if I could have produced that sort of really dense, detailed, one-sided, one-page summary of a complicated patient, if I was able to create something that rich electronically, and then anyone who was taking care of that patient was able to like instantly view that would be transformative. You know, like the person's on vacation in Michigan, they get sick, they go to the ER, and then that ER doctor can see like everything, like in 5 minutes they can just like absorb everything they need to know about the patient. That would be like incredible for for their care.
Right.
And that's something we could clearly do.
Yeah.
But like, can they do that now? Absolutely not.
Not possible.
Well, it is possible. It's just they're not doing it.
Oh, they're not doing it. Interesting.
So I mean, I actually think it's, depending on what you wanted to do in this field. I mean, it is something. If you like, in terms of making a difference, if you do a really good job in this field, you can make a whole lot bigger difference than you can as a clinician, because you can like build tools that thousands of people use to make
and
them
that
better.
would really facilitate care, speed things up, make things more efficient. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Streamline things so you don't have like these bottlenecks in your sort of protocol of how people go through a clinic or things like that. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So it's really like it's honestly it's at the center of the stuff that I'm most excited about in my current job and my job at Erie too.
Yeah.
I mean, at Erie we had a different arrangement. We had Erie was one of 4 owners of this thing called the Alliance of Chicago. And the Alliance, I don't know if you've heard about this from Lisa, but they basically implemented the EMR at those 4 owners, but then also 30 plus health center organizations around the country, including like in Hawaii and New York State, and all over the place.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a Chicago thing.
Interesting.
And so all those, like the servers that hosted the EMR were in Chicago, and they, were constantly updating and improving and customizing the software, building a data warehouse to support, the kind of non-EMR data needs, and, building specialized care management software to like make it easier to organize information about the patients.
And it was custom built for you guys?
I mean, we were, pretty much everything we were doing was, using some Microsoft product or some, GE product, but then we would like take their core, base product and customize all the content within it.
Okay.
And that was really interesting and very, I think very impactful. Like you can really, if you can make it easier for someone who only has 20 minutes with a patient to like rapidly access the information they need, they can, do a better job taking care of the patient, and they can get more done in that 20 minutes. Like the efficiency is not just a business imperative. It's people can spend less and less time focused on interacting with the computer system to absorb the information they need to take great care of the patient, then all that extra time is going to be spent with the patient.
Right.
And patients are complicated, and like they don't always communicate well, and like if you only have 1 minute to figure out what's going on, then you might not figure it out right.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And then
Yeah. Wow.
So it's like the importance of this. I mean, that human interaction part, I think, has not changed probably for a millennium or whatever.
Right.
But the sort of potential of this piece of the work is new and surprisingly, in its infancy.
Yeah. Well, because you were just saying before, like it's been decades since we've had personal computers, and it's taken this long for people to really start paying attention to how to really incorporate that into care.
Yeah.
And it's hasn't been, obviously from what you're saying, has not been a easy, fit, as far as working with patients and giving them the care that they need. In some ways being even an impediment in some ways. So,
I mean, it's, what I'm saying about it being an impediment is not controversial. I mean, it is like absolutely universally agreed on by all clinicians everywhere. And you can find 1,000 surveys that would document that, at any level.
Yeah.
And, like I said, there's some people who are less dissatisfied, sometimes because out of ignorance that they don't know don't know that there's anything else available. But it's like incredible. It's a interesting and unsolved problem.
Right. I mean, I wonder if like it was just one of those things where maybe a lot of people just assumed that it would just naturally figure itself out. Like, oh, we just have a computer, just type stuff in there, problem solved, right? I mean, I think that maybe people didn't pay attention to it enough because of one of that maybe that reason too. And like you said, there wasn't an economic incentive to do so either.
Right.
So why change, right?
Yeah, like when the Affordable Care Act came out, like no one was really using EMRs. These companies were like very rudimentary. They were like, these systems were built by engineers. And nothing against engineers. I like working with engineers very much, but they weren't necessarily people who understood the work, that the clinicians were doing. And at the end of the day, you can't, one of my mantras in working on this stuff is it's all about the workflows of the people. Like if you know exactly what that person, the end user, is going to do, then you can build, an information technology tool to perfectly provide them with the information they need to carry that out, and make it as perfectly efficient to enter the information they need to enter into the system. Part of the problem with the EMR manufacturers is they don't know who their end users are. Their end users, if it's like Epic and they have maybe 1,000 cardiology practices across the country, probably there's a lot of diversity in the workflows in those 1,000 offices.
Right.
And so those engineers are trying to like make one tool that can like perfectly support 1,000 different workflows. And you know what? It doesn't work too well.
Right.
Then everyone's like, at best they're going to like, reduce the level of dissatisfaction to the minimum possible, which is still going to be very high because some people's workflows will be very different than the thing it's built around.
Yeah.
Or even more often, like they don't even think of supporting a workflow. They just say, well, your workflow can be whatever you want, but we'll just make sure you can access whatever information you need.
But so they're not thinking about workflow. They're not thinking about, the time that you spend with the patient, and then after the patient, what you have to do, and there's other pieces of that puzzle. Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, it's all in here. Go dig through and find it, and and then you're like, well, I only got 20 minutes, and I don't know how much I can dig. And, 20 minutes if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So, like part of what I'm really excited about, probably the most exciting thing about my new job is we have an EMR, but
And this is at Oak Street?
Yes, yeah, Oak Street. So we have, a few EMRs, not most of them, have these things called APIs, which I don't even know what that stands for, but it's like a way to plug into the database of the EMR, like externally.
Yeah.
And like reach in and access information that's in there. And a lot of the biggest EMRs don't have APIs, partially because like they're like, well, if you want to do something with a database, call us up and hire us for $2 million and we'll build you whatever you want. So like we don't want you to mess around with our products,
Right.
But I think some of the sort of either newer or EMRs that are not in the top 10 or something, like out of desperation for finding customers, they're like, well, is that what you want? Okay, well, we need to have an edge somehow. So like the EMR we have is one that I had never even heard of before I came to Oak Street. So my assumption going in was like, well, one of my jobs is going to be like get rid of this crazy EMR that they found when they opened the company. I didn't know any better. I didn't have any